How does Tai Chi come into the curriculum, and where did that come in? I mean, as far as Doc's learning and your learning?
So that actually going back to his origin. Well, so in his origin story, there's actually something that you guys might like. He actually learned. So he started learning Tai Chi first. He learned the 108 step form Yang style Tai Chi in Chinatown, where he was as a kid, and it was just the form. It didn't really have that martial application, and that's kind of where he started looking out towards other martial arts. And he actually did a short stint of Xingyi, and I don't know. He told me just recently. I just recently asked him who his teacher was. The last name was Fa, but I don't know anything else, and I don't recall any big Xingyi schools in San Francisco when I was there. So it could have been, somebody who was teaching and then maybe nobody carried it on, or they moved somewhere else around wherever. But he did offer when he first branched off and he was teaching on his own, he did offer, I think it was at the Noriega Street School. He had Choy Li Fut and Xingyi as well, but just for a little bit. And then he decided to put most of his focus on Choy Li Fut after that. So from there, later on, years down the road, when he went to China and he was looking for his, masters to learn further his Choy Li Fut, that's where he met Hu Yunqiu from the Jingwei lineage. Hu Yunqiu also taught Yang style Tai Chi. He was that guy. Man, if I could go back in time, I would love to either be alongside him while he was learning or just be able to learn from him, because I think I'm pretty cool being able to learn from Doc-Fai Wong and his son Jason Wong, and I've met so many masters, these days by virtue of just being around them. But man, this guy learned from very, very important figures. So Hu Yunqiu was a direct student of Yang Chengfu, and he learned Yang style Tai Chi from him. He was same generation as Cheng Nanqing, right? The Yang style. So it's crazy to see the differences in how they perpetuated the art. But so he learned from Yang Chengfu, and it's crazy when I ask Grandmaster sometimes, I'm like, how did, Great Grandmaster teach you this? And he's like, well, he said that Yang Chengfu did it this way. And it's like, man, he experienced this from Yang Chengfu, which is just bonkers to me. But he also learned, and I do know a little bit, and I know it just through forms. I don't know it through like really dedicated formal training, but I do know some Wudan sword forms, and that's from Hu Yunqiu as well. He learned from, I don't know, I have to double check. It has been said that he learned from Li Jinglin. The warlord. And, but I know for sure it was his sword brother, Guo Qifeng, that he learned Wudan sword forms from. And I didn't realize the connection to that. I figured it was the Wudan stuff that we learned was kind of an offshoot, or like one of those like village, ones from way back that maybe not a lot of people know, because I know Wudan people now. I know people that have trained in Wudan Mountain and they've learned out there, and our stuff doesn't look similar at all. So I always figured it wasn't really connected. But I recently put out a video when I was doing stuff for LK Chen. I did a sword form, and it was one of the Wudan forms. And I got some emails from some people that are like, oh my gosh, this is from this, lineage, and it's just rare to see this form and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is actually still very well recognized, which is pretty cool to see. Like I said, I only know some forms, and I didn't really get any specific training in that. Grandmaster has just kind of kept it at that. He's like, everybody does so much with Choy Li Fut and Tai Chi that it would be too much to try to dedicate an entire system or anything like that. So every so often in instructor class, we would get some drills, or we would just, learn a form here and there. But anyway, that came from Hu Yunqiu, all of that, the Yang style Tai Chi, the Wudan, and the Choy Li Fut that came from one of the most influential people. That came from Chen Yuqi was his name. And he was the one that documented a lot of the Choy Li Fut forms. So I also think that's when we had kind of, from his generation, is also where we had an explosion of the amount of forms in that system. But that's where that came from. Grandmaster learned it from him, and at first he wasn't really interested in it. the story for that was it was after shadowing him at his clinic. They went out on the balcony and he's like, do you know push hands? You know, the push hands pattern. And Grandmaster was like, yeah, sure. I know it. But he wasn't really super invested in it. Wasn't very interested. And this is not like freestyle push hands. This is you're doing the circle, you roll the hand over, turn over, and then press. Mm-hmm. It's just that repetition, that pattern. Yep. They're going, and he's like, we were doing it for like 20 minutes, half an hour, and he was just zoning out. And that's when Huiyun Cho was like, look out. And then he just gave him like this jolt, some fudging, and just kind of like pushed him back on the balcony. He's leaning on the rail, and he's like, holy smokes, that was so much power. I need to learn this. And that's kind of like when he smarted up and was like, this is worth learning. So he started relearning the system, learning the forms, and getting, getting his Tai Chi that way. And as for me, I started doing Tai Chi because it was back in the Reno days at that school. We had we offered both. We stuck with the Federation in that respect. And, it was just one of those things I was learning to teach, and they were like, well, you should learn how to teach Tai Chi as well, so you can have more students here. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just do it. I mean, I was young. I was probably like, I think 17 or 18. So similarly, I wasn't very interested in the beginning, you know, like my main drive was so that I could learn the sword. I wanted to learn that straight sword, and learning it in Choy Li Fut was like, you got to be super advanced. Like, it's just so far out in the curriculum. And I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of like my fast track to it. I'm going to learn 32-step sword. All right. And going through the forms and going through the training, I did it. I just kept doing it. I didn't get serious in it until I got to San Francisco, and it was cool. It was really cool. One of the first kind of duties that I had was, you know, Grandmaster was like, well, what are you doing on Tuesday morning? And this is like, you know, first week I was there. I was like, well, nothing. I'm just going to be hanging out until I have to come in and teach. And he's like, why don't you pick me up? We'll go I have my lesson that I teach at Telegraph Hill. So, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll drive you out there. And went over, and I would drive him Tuesdays and Thursdays. In the beginning, we would go down to Telegraph Hill, where he taught a free Tai Chi class. And he had been doing it for years. I think he started, as a part of City College. He was offering a program there, and then he just continued it because there's a senior center that's right there in Telegraph Hill. It's like the most San Francisco like when you think San Francisco, you're there. Like, we would take Lombard Street. You could just take that crooked street down, and you're there at that community center. Or you could go around and take Chestnut or whatever and then drop down. And he was teaching there, and it was so cool because he would do kind of the traditional way. And this is not how he would teach in the school. This is how he would teach at the community center, and that traditional kind of park style way where everybody they follow along with the form. But he would kind of use that as the warm up. And then he would take a specific section and then go into super detail and really pick things apart. And he had longtime students that were there, people that actually cared about the details in the art. And of course, people that did it because they're seniors and this was low impact and it was good for their health. And the ones that were more serious about it, he would go around and he'd give like the real like nitpicky corrections. And that's where I started getting super corrected on things, and not just, like the come by and like just kind of, move your thumb and then not give you a reason behind it, but actually like make the adjustment and then kind of give some like a little push against the stance or whatever to really make you feel where the connection or the alignment was coming from, or the intention. And there would be some times where I would see, as we would do it, and I was taking him over there months and months, and we did it a couple of years before he stopped, or he slowed the schedule down. But there would be some times where you'd see the same lesson, and even though he's still going over something that he would teach even in seminars, when I would drive him out to Sacramento and he'd be teaching a seminar, it'd be something where I'd pick up something new every time. And it was like so amazing to see him do these stances, do these movements, and see like what I needed to aspire to, but then also see how he taught it and also feel in real time to get the adjustments from the person that knows this so well. And that made a huge impact on my Tai Chi. That's when I decided to learn it, to really get immersed in the art. And I know you guys have had quite a few people that do like Tai Chi, Yang style, and a lot of internal arts, and they also have a connection to Chinese medicine. And Grandmaster also had his license. He was an acupuncturist. For many years. He let that go because you have to do, you have to have a certain amount of hours every year for your continued training.
Yeah.
And he was just too busy going back and forth. He's been spending more time in China and also just teaching seminars and stuff. So he let it go, and he would just work on students when they needed things. And I was always there in the office, and he would always like, hey, look at this point, if he's poking somebody. And on the times where I had injuries, he was showing me, like, it was cool. I had my own needle. We had it in our cabinet. I would have my own needle, and I was responsible to keep my needle clean and sanitized. And he would show me that stuff. And then I asked him one day, I was like, can I learn this from you? And I learned a wonderful Cantonese phrase. It's called "bung tong sai," and it's basically half bucket of water. And he said, it's useless. You either want a full bucket or you want an empty bucket, but not a half-filled bucket. It's useless that way. He said, you can't learn what you need to learn just by being around me. He said, if you really want to do this, you need to go to school and go to like one of those universities for Chinese medicine. And I was like, okay, that makes perfect sense. I'll just kind of sit back and watch and associate a couple of things here and there. But it's not something where, I wanted, it's just, I didn't have the time to invest in it either. So it's not something that I regret. I do have a decent knowledge on some basic dita and stuff like that, but nothing to where I would open up a clinic or be one of those guys that say that they could. So I have high respect for the people that do. And just knowing certain points and knowing connection of the body and anatomy has really helped with Tai Chi. But it hasn't been something where it's kind of worked together and integrated into that.
I know you had mentioned that in their Tai Chi system, that you had straight sword. Were there any other weapons?
Yes. So straight sword, fan, spear, and then now we're at a point where Grandmaster is introducing new weapons. And it's been more so for people to just kind of have fun with the art. After a certain level, you're going to have exposure to, you're going to have students that are going to want to get in depth into their stuff and really promote and cultivate that. But then there's some others that have done it for years and they want something new to learn. So there has been, newer weapons. I've really enjoyed it because we've been doing things like double straight sword, double broadsword, flute, cane, and staff as well. And each one each one has its benefit. And I see it as a teacher too. I see that there's a benefit that you can learn, different types of footwork, different types of weapon work as well. And it's not just guesses of how the weapon would be used, but it's, knowing how the weapon would be used, but also with under the blanket of Tai Chi principles and, that side of things. But, a lot of, we do have the 32, we do some of the standardized Chinese, stuff, 24 step for hand form, or like the 16 and 8. And then as well, the 32 sword and the long sword, we just call it, and Tai Chi saber and whatnot. But, we do have the weapons work. And I have to say, actually, so I've been doing, I keep bringing this up. I've been very lucky, and this has had a huge impact on a lot of what I've understood recently about Chinese culture and understanding more about both arts, Choy and Tai Chi. And I've been working with LK Chen in checking out swords from different parts of Chinese history. And I would say for cutting, and I'm by no means like a master for cutting, target cutting and whatnot. There's some amazing people out there. I think Lao Sher, Scott Rodell. I I've taught some webinars with him, and I've been so lucky that in teaching butterfly knives for his online academy, I've had times to just speak and talk to him and on a real conversational level and just hear all sorts of his points of view and his understanding. And after reading his books, it's been really incredible. Like he is, especially like what he defines as a swordsman. And of course, I've also recently come into contact with a man in Hong Kong. His name is Lancelot Chan, and he is a champion cutter. And he's also recently designed his own swords, optimized swords for cutting, which is really cool. But being able to work with like a correctly weighted blade that the past masters were using, as well as seeing, I mean, as silly as it is, at one time I thought that, that the typical ox-tailed broadsword, I thought this was the only sword ever in China, and it came from Shaolin 3,000 years ago. Like I was under that dojo lore, like it just kind of, I accepted it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then another one is like the straight sword too. I thought, cause you always hear, and I think it's a mistranslation, but a perpetuated mistranslation is that, you only use, the sword is only sharp at the last 3-4 inches of the sword.
Right.
Like that's a common thing. And I have, out of all these historic swords I've seen, none of them have been sharpened at just the end of the sword. Yeah. What I think it is that you're using, like for certain techniques, it's geared towards those, like tapping techniques and certain cuts are going to use that part of the sword, but it doesn't mean that the whole thing is not sharp. So being, and doing this extra stuff and then doing the cutting training, my Tai Chi has paid off so much, my Tai Chi sword forms, because I have, you're moving slow. You can see the alignment of your blade and consistently working on that, where I mean, if you're just doing the form, you don't really, it's just like doing a hand form, right? You don't understand the depth of it until you connect with somebody. And it becomes cyclical, right? So doing a hand form and then doing push hands and even in just doing just those two, even outside of having actual combat or sparring or fighting, you can still learn a lot more depth. So with the sword, you have to have some kind of experience in contact. And it could be simple, like not if for the people listening to this podcast, I mean, you could take a wooden training sword and just practice just touching and moving the blade edge along a post or a target, or a curtain. Like as long as you're not going to cut it or do damage to either your sword or whatever you're hitting, you can practice your blade edge alignment like that. And Tai Chi sets you up so perfectly for that. You have to cut. If you know where you're striking, you know where you're making contact, you can pay attention exactly to how you draw that blade. And then when you actually can cut a target, whether it be just as simple as a water bottle, or you're going to cut something harder like tatami or bamboo, you can feel how the rest of the body has to be together in that, because it's not just the sword that's going to be doing the work at that point. Water bottles, you can kind of get by with that, but the harder targets, you have to have everything together. And if you're paying attention while you're doing your Tai Chi form, oh my gosh, the skill, it increases so much. Like in the faster arts, you can kind of cheat through it with speed. But when you have to move slow, you really have to refine everything. And I was really surprised how much just my prior training in Tai Chi and just doing forms helped my cutting. It already gave me such a jump start on that. But yeah.
Boy, that's great. That's funny because that wasn't out of the blue, beautiful little pearl, because I was going to ask you how your Tai Chi and vice versa, how your Choy foot, how those two inform each other, because they're two very distinct arts. And I was wondering, is there any bridge, and is there any, have they helped you in each one helped you in your teaching process as well?
Yes, definitely. So I do want to start it with a little bit of a caveat that it's kind of like language. And I'm relating a lot to this nowadays, being in Switzerland and having to speak different languages. We don't get that in the U.S. The most you get is like maybe somebody comes in with like a Mississippi accent, and you have to, what is that? But in like, I try to keep them separate. So Tai Chi is Tai Chi, Choy Li Fut is Choy Li Fut. And there is a certain point where you can keep them separate. But just as in speaking a different language, there's going to be times where your flips out. You have your English accent on French, or you have vice versa, or you stumble over a word, or you default to a phrase that fits in your original language or your mother tongue or whatever. So there are times where there will be some blending, but it's not intentional. I try to make sure, as well as my Grandmaster Doc-Fai Wong, he keeps things separate. With that said, though, I would say how you mentioned it, informing it is a great way of explaining it, because there are a lot of similarities. I think the emphasis of the yao, the waist in Tai Chi is almost identical to the emphasis that we put on the waist in Choy Li Fut as well. And though there are things that were more specifically said in Tai Chi, like especially Peng energy, if we're looking at just to say even the stance, keeping the knees out and not collapsed inward. That Peng energy is really pointed out in Tai Chi, but in Choy Li Fut, it's one of those things like, make sure your knee is over your toes, make sure that when you sink down, this knee goes forward, this knee, the knee is level with the hip. And it's not specifically said, but after doing Tai Chi, it's like, oh yeah, this is this is our Choy Li Fut version of Peng energy. And then, like Fa Jing energy as well. And this is something that has been beneficial on both ends. And I think this is something for anybody serious in doing an art like Tai Chi that practices and trains slow. You cannot only learn slow. You have to be able to learn combative moves at combative speed. And having Choy Li Fut experience and having an understanding of, because we call them ging. Ging is Jing. It's just different dialect. But having that relaxed power that we focus on, and say like a straight punch, is going to be very similar to how we would do relaxed power with Fa Jing and Tai Chi. And you can see, like I would see it, upper level, advanced level students that all they did was Tai Chi, and when they actually tried to move fast, they would be so stiff. So being on both sides of it has been really helpful, because Tai Chi has helped me maintain relaxed within movement, but at the same time, Choy Li Fut has made sure that I know how to be relaxed at a full speed. So there's been good crossover like that. And then I would say there's some cool, like application wise, there are some similarities too. To go back to the signature Choy Li Fut, So Choy, that is very similar to the hit the tiger technique, where you're swinging that second hand, or, you do like a grab and then you're coming up with that punch. That's like we call it Nam Choy, because Choy Li Fut loves So Choy so much, they have 4 different ways of throwing it. You have your horizontal, downward, vertical, and then like an upward diagonal. So it's very similar to that. But yeah, and teaching wise, I love integrating push hands into, like, that was the one thing that went across both arts in San Francisco. And when I was in the Reno days, we would only do push hands with Tai Chi classes. And when I moved to San Francisco, we were like, okay, one of the instructors I was helping out with, he's like, all right, let's do some push hands. And it's like, wait, this is Choy Li Fut class. What are you doing? But it's like so important to get that connection with somebody and to be at that close distance and to work on those fundamentals. And of course, Tai Chi has a lot of an advantage there because of the Tai Chi principles feed really well into push hands. But one of the things that I discovered too is being able to take it not just, like, oh, we're going to use push hands as a drill to understand staying connected, feeling the person's balance, and then learning how to push, and manipulate their balance, aim for the spine, those kinds of things. But actually be able to use it in a fighting context. And for me, one of my favorite ways of doing the drill was, I guess I made a drill that used push hands. And we would do it in our sparring class every so often when we were working at a close range in a squared off stance. Because I feel that when you're squared off, you're at punching range and you're just digging in and throwing these shots. If you have an understanding of push hands and you understand just the simplest to like really distill it, just looking at where their spine is and being able to push directly to their spine. You have that muscle memory to connect and aim for the spine. When you're in at close range and you don't have a lot of room to set up and generate power, those are going to be the strikes that are really going to disrupt your opponent. Whether or not it's going to be something where you really get a good rib shot, liver shot, or you're going to be able to hit the solar plexus or anything like that, or even going up towards the head and get a nice angle. If you can connect there, you're really going to disrupt them from stop their movement. They're not going to be able to throw a good strike from there. You can make it so that they're softer and you actually have the advantage, or you could just take them out. So I would have our sparring classes your feet aren't staggered. You don't have like a bow stance. You're like a third line stance. The feet are even. You sink down, and then we would just do it from the shoulders to the hips. We just keep it in that area, just torso. But we would be throwing punches, and it's not hard punches. It's more, you would start kind of with a pushing punch and not trying to snap and knock the wind out of somebody. But you would start with that, and then as people get with the drill, of course, they're always going to get a little more competitive. You're going to throw with a little more power. So you just naturally let it progress. But I've found that has been a huge benefit to a lot of the close range game, because you get a lot of students. They love throwing things. They love throwing punches and kicks from far away. But and in Choy Fut, we do it. I mean, we have that option. Not like you guys in Wing Chun.
We got our little T-Rex. We got our little T-Rex arms.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are right there. That's a range we don't like to be in. So being able to use push hands as kind of the bridge and something that they were familiar with, but then also looking at kind of a standalone drill made a huge impact, and people were more confident at being at that close range. So I think anybody out there, whether or not you're looking for, how to integrate push hands into your training, whatever, if it's in your art or not, I think it's beneficial training no matter what style you do. And to go way back to make that circle back into the Swiss wrestling, when I was teaching and I was learning Tai Chi and we were doing push hands back in the Reno days, and that's also, I still was doing Swiss wrestling at that time. My cousin made a comment to me about how difficult it was to enter for the takedowns, to enter in for those things. I was feeling where he was going to try to move, and I would jam him. I'd stuff the technique, or I'd push him off balance and he just couldn't complete it. And he said, and on top of it all too, my balance, moving and standing was really, really solid. It was stand out enough that he straight up told me about that. He was like, man, whatever you're doing, keep it up.
That's awesome.
I have a question, sort of and you had mentioned earlier about sort of the language in that part of Switzerland. And I was wondering, do you teach in English?
As much as I can.
Sure.
So we have, Geneva is a very international city. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people will do business in English. That's more of the common language for a lot of companies out here, which gives me an advantage for that.
Sure.
So I do have a lot of English-speaking students, but I also do have French-speaking students. And that has been, it's also been really helpful, actually, in looking at how martial arts has been perpetuated, because a lot of people have learned from immigrants, and they've learned from people that English is their second language. And thinking about, how do I explain to this person in a language that I'm, like a fourth or fifth grader in, I'm young, I'm like a child, like in this language. How do I explain it in the level of depth that I could in English? In English, I can make it poetic. I can attack it from different angles. But in French, it's like, it's very basic, and it's a lot of, I'm lucky, here in Switzerland, there is no national language. There are 4 main languages: French, German, and it's Swiss German, Italian, and Romansh. And that's like really a small area that speaks that. So you run into people from everywhere here, and a language barrier is expected. Like, you expect that, you're going to say the basics in French because we're just kind of in this area, but you might hear from their accent that they're not French, and you might throw out something in German, or you might throw something out in, there's a lot of Portuguese here and a lot of Italians here. So you hear that too. Huh. And you just kind of throw words out until you find that common language and then you speak together. So that's kind of been a nice buffer for teaching. And students are a lot more patient with me for when I cannot explain it or I say the wrong word. So so that's been interesting too, because I have a student that I teach like 100% in French. And then also I taught seminars on the other side of the country, and I've had to speak in Swiss German over there.
Huh.
And that's also just been like another side of it. And I'm just happy that people are patient with me, because my French, I had formal schooling for that. And, my grammar is, like I said, it's like a child. But for Swiss German, I picked that up from my family, and I picked that up.
Sure.
I spent some time working on that side of the country. So I never learned formal grammar, and then everything's dialect as well. And so it's just huge mishmash. Like,
whoa.
Really patient with me. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it too, and this happened to my dad a lot, is that whenever he would come out here and see family and speak to them, they would laugh, but not like laugh at him. It was kind of funny how he was speaking, because his language was from the 30s and 40s, where my grandparents, because they left and they kept the language there. So it'd be like as if I was talking to you guys and saying, oh, that's swell, like, oh, like Leave It to Beaver with a transatlantic accent. So anytime he's out here and anytime he'd be visiting and he would talk to anybody, they'd be like, whoa, it's like I'm talking to a farmer from the 40s. What's going on?
Oh, that's good. That's good. Oh my goodness. What brought you to Switzerland?
Well, so, actually, I haven't really said much publicly about it, but I kind of always kept it pretty simple. I always said, opportunity. And it was really easy for me to move here because I'm Swiss, and that usually just saying that would kind of move the conversation on. But to be truthful and to go a little more in depth, because some people do wonder, is it was my wife. She got a great job out here. So we had always been like long distance. When I first met her, we were dating, and after the first year, she finished her master's program, and then she took an internship in Uganda, and she was there for a year. Wow. So we would, I went there once, she came back twice throughout that year, and then she came back to the States, and she moved back to San Francisco, and she was there for probably, I want to say 2 months. And then she got a job in Atlanta. And then she was out there for 2 years, and we would go back and forth. And then I got her back in San Francisco. She got a job back there, and she was there for 2 years. And then I want to say it's been like that. Yeah. And then she got this job in Switzerland, and then she had the opportunity in Switzerland. She didn't get the job. She asked me, there's this great job. It's a huge step up for me. And, it's in Switzerland. And she's like, should I apply for it? And I was thinking, you know what? You've supported me through my 10 years. I call them the temple years, because I was living in that school pretty much.
Sure.
And I was like, you know what? You've supported me through that. I'm tired of being away from you. So yeah, let's do this. I have my Swiss citizenship. It'll be easy for me, which was super easy. And that's great. Like, let's go. Let's do it. So that's really the story. It's you can blame my wife.
That's a great story. No, that's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I only have one last question.
I have two.
Okay. I'll ask mine. And then we'll let Owen finish it up. Did you compete at all for the school, for Doc-Fai Wong school? And how did you compete? Yeah, go for it.
So, it's kind of funny, and man, it's interesting. There's so much that I actually was thinking. I was like, I should bring this up. So we'll have to talk again, because I know you have a love for Taekwondo, and I have some great stories about my Reno days and doing sparring there, because there's a lot of Taekwondo schools around there. But as far as competing, I have to tell you, I am naturally not competitive. An amazing way to explain it is when I was in school, I had my friend and I we we were in a competition in school in track and field. And it was like, simple thing, like whoever wins this is going to represent or take whatever this, take the lead on this. And I knew his life was more track and field than my life. So like I straight up threw it. Like I threw the chance of beating him because in my heart, like I knew he wanted it more. So knowing that about myself is always been like, yeah, I don't care that strongly about competition. I like competing against myself. I like testing my skills. But if it comes down to being like, oh, I want to go win these medals, I want to go do this, it's the last thing on my mind. I did compete, and we would host our own tournament for our federation. We would host the federation tournament every year. And I was the one actually doing all of the background stuff for that. It was me and the other program director who was actually still running the school in San Francisco, Sifu Brian Kuttel. We would basically everything from setting up the facility rental to setting up insurance, all the data stuff, getting the medals, dealing by hand too. We did it all by paper. Every competitor, we would set up the competition form. We would go over it, and we made wristbands for them and had all the backups and files and everything. And it was like one of those things where if we wanted to compete, we could compete in whatever we wanted. You just jump in. But it was like on the day of, you feel like, oh my God, I don't know what I want to compete in. But I always tried to push to do things because I was teaching my students. I want to show them that I can compete and, represent the school. And so yeah, I would compete. Forms were always easier to do because you do your sparring competitions. It's going to be a huge time and energy investment as well. But I always did that. I like to spar. I love to spar, but again, it's one of those things where I didn't really feel like I had to go out to compete to prove anything. So that's something for myself. I almost feel like nowadays I wish I would have done more. I thought it was kind of silly to collect trophies because I don't know if you guys have ever done any friendship tournaments, but I got kind of disenfranchised by going to a friendship tournament where people are pretty much guaranteed a medal. And if you were good, you get gold. If you were okay, you get silver. And if you were bad, you'd still get a bronze medal. But everybody left with a medal. And I did one of those, and I was like, this is, I could just do this and say I'm a gold medal international winner, because that happened in China. It was this like friendship tournament conference thing. And knowing now too how common those are, I think that medals and trophies are, like you could go to even an open tournament, and if there's only 2 people competing in your division, you're either getting gold or silver, right, and you could go back and have bragging rights over that. So I didn't really care for that side of it. But I think nowadays, now that we're living in this internet generation where everybody wants to see your past accomplishments, they want to see you in action, I do kind of feel like that should have been something I did anyway. But yeah, I did. I would spar and I would compete, but it was mostly in local tournaments, even in the Reno days. And that's what we'll talk about another time against Taekwondo, because those were not in open tournaments. I just had my instructor. He had a lot of connections, so he would take me around to different schools, and I have some great stories about that. I really have to tell you those. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm not really a strong competitor. There is another guy, another Choy instructor that is a part of my association. He is from the San Diego schools. He lives here in Geneva, or no, he lives out further inland, but he teaches sometimes here in Geneva. And he actually loves to compete, and he is a champion here in Swiss tournaments for forms. Oh, wow. So he's also a professional skateboarder. Go figure. So he loves competition.
Love it.
Yeah. But I know it's kind of like, oh, well, come on. But yeah, I don't compete much.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. First question is, and I know we touched on this earlier, but is there any sort of like formal teaching in the system around like bridging and between people and that type of training?
I would say definitely not in the depth of, like Chisao, nothing like that. We do teach, you're going to have points of connection. Any of the techniques that are going to specifically be called Q, like, Kwan Q or Young Q, Tum Q, those are bridging techniques. Yep. But for the most part, it's not like in the depth of something you would get from like say Wing Chun and doing your Chisao training. I think a lot of that though does come back to the 2-person forms. And again, I've been very lucky that we've had as many 2-person forms as we do, especially like the hand forms, because one of them, Golden Leopard versus Tiger, that's like an intermediate level form, but that one has a lot of bridging in it, and it has a lot of, for lack of a better term, staying sticky with your partner, your opponent. And that was one that blew my mind when I got to Grandmaster school, because we had done it on a more surface level of just 1-to-1 when I was in Reno, and we didn't have many training partners. When I got out to San Francisco, it was like, you don't need a specific training partner. You work with everybody. Anybody who knows the form, you just switch. You work with them. You work with them. You have to learn to work with different bodies and sizes and all of that. So
yeah, for sure.
That made a huge difference. And then moving on to another 2-person hand form, the Plum Blossom versus Cross Pattern hand form. That one taught me so much about rhythm when you're connecting, because it was no longer on 1-to-1, just your block, their strike, your strike, their block. You would have, they do a strike and then you block and then you connect and pull it and then you go in for your strike. So there were these like double hits and rhythms and things like that. And it really like blew my mind when I hit that one too. And those two sides were so different, where you have some forms where it's very symmetrical. Like our very first 2-person form, we call it 9-star. And those ones, it begins with like the 3-star arm banging. So you're doing the exact same thing. And then you have like a back fist, vertical back fist, and then a horizontal back fist. And then you do you bridge at the arm, and then you do another one where you catch and then strike. Like those are very symmetrical. But then moving on to the next step of staying sticky with little bits of different strikes, but still staying more or less symmetrical. And then jumping to asymmetrical, 2 completely different sides, different forms, basically. And having them connect on different rhythms was really just, like I said, mind-blowing on that one.
Nice. That's awesome. Very cool. Thank you. And my last question is, I know that you had mentioned sort of bag training and the parallels that you saw with training in the bench. But I was wondering if there were any other types of sort of ancillary training in your system around sort of strength training in particular.
I mean, a lot of that just is the weapons. A lot of that is just using heavy weapons. I think that was the big emphasis.
Sure.
Other than that, it was dependent on the instructor. So we didn't have weights in the school. Like we did have a kettlebell, but it wasn't anything where, it was used specifically in curriculum. But we did put an emphasis on, it just depended like on the instructor. Some of us liked using resistance bands, calisthenic exercises, body weight exercises, and then heavy bag and wall bag and wooden dummy, but nothing like, specific weightlifting. I want to say, I might think of something later on, like, oh yeah, we did some brick lifting or this or that, but for the most part, I would say no.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got one more question on your way out, my friend, and thank you for your time today.
Hey, thank you guys. I could keep going. So I appreciate it.
So tell us about your new book.
Oh yeah. So my new book is Choy Kicking and Sweeping Techniques. And I am really proud of this one. So this is not the first book that I've written and published. Earlier on in the pandemic, I wrote a book called Monkey Movement. And it's more like a classical manual. It's got a lot of pictures, and it was like just how to do certain techniques. And it was more based on not the striking or kicking or like practical applications, but more so for the supplementary acrobatic techniques. So that was a fun book, but I couldn't even make it big enough. It wasn't thick enough to even get words on the spine. So I was like super happy that when this one came out, it's like super thick. But I do have another book, and I have to mention that I co-authored a book with Grandmaster Doc-Fai Wong about Tai Chi sword. So that one was released earlier this year, and that one's available on Amazon. And it has a basic short sword form in there. We teach it to beginners, and it's specifically our Plum Blossom Federation beginner sword form. But I really like it because it's a nice, it has good diversity in technique. So it's not, it's just a shorter form. It's really what it is. It's not anything technically different from longer forms. And we had some time to add, things that I picked up over the years from Grandmaster. We were able to kind of highlight and put those in the book as well. So there's some good sword theory. There's some explanations, and it's funny to me because in my mind, I thought this was, common knowledge. And after the book came out, some people were asking about specifics as to, like what is a sword finger for? Like when you have the two fingers together, when you're doing sword, your offhand has the sword finger position. And then also like, why is the finger pointing on a sword? Or like when you're holding the sword and you're doing a thrust, why do people hold the sword like that? Because, if your finger is over the guard, it's putting itself in harm's way. Somebody's sword is going to end up sliding down and hitting your finger, or people that do sparring are like, I've had my finger nearly broken when it sticks out. So why do you do that? And having a reason for it is actually, it's how you grip the sword and developing like wrist snapping. I kind of talk about it in the book, and I even made a video shortly after that, talking about that. But gripping with your middle finger and your ring finger, is our natural way of gripping. That's where we're going to have our most firm grip. And then using the pinky to, pull in, and just like playing like a drumstick, it has like a snapping power.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That adds power to the sword. And then if your index finger is wrapped around the sword in a more practical sense, if you give a sword to a beginner, they're going to hold it like that, and they're going to be extremely stiff, and they're not going to do correct articulations, and they're going to end up injuring themselves with the sword. So having the fingers stick out forces you to hold it correctly. And it's not always explained to people. And especially like, you look at prior, old school instructors where you don't question, if your teacher says something, then you just do it. Or if they do it a certain way, you just do it, and you try to pick it up from reading between the lines, or you just never learn. So some people have always questioned that, and that's the simple answer, is it's just developing that wrist range, mobility, and snapping power for the sword. So that's also in that book. And I thought that was really interesting that some people were like, oh, that's really cool that that's there. But the kicking book, the one I'm proud of, back to that, this book is like, I have to look, because it's 226 pages long, 225 pages long. And I always joke around. I'm like, man, it's got a lot of writing in there. It's not just pictures and diagrams. So I took a look at the different kicking techniques that we have in Choy Li Fut. We have 22 specific kicking techniques and 6 sweeping techniques. And it's kind of interesting because you have like 4 different front kicks. And whenever we were doing kicking training in school or in forums, we actually just used English names. For everything else, we used the Chinese name. You have Choy, Chang'an Choy, Yum Top, all these things, right? For the hands. But then when it came to the feet, we're front kick, roundhouse kick, side kick. So it was fun to look back and index all of the different kicking techniques. And once I did that, I was like, man, there's a lot here, and a lot that I would have never have called by name, if I didn't take the time to really look through this. And so it was a nice way to share that with people. But then also I have a good chunk of the book that covers just my own experience and insight in training and context, because I think context is where a lot of Kung Fu styles get stuck. That we're always thinking, especially like on a book on Kung Fu, you expect it to be that traditional manual where you've got side A doing a tiger claw and side B doing, a dragon block, where it's in a self-defense situation, it's going to be, nobody's going to be doing a dragon claw or a tiger claw against you. So you have to adapt to that and just using kicks in self-defense as compared to kicks in what I just call traditional application, because that's something that's going to still fit that mold of how you would do it in a kung fu school or how you would probably learn it, as well as combat sports as well. Because I said it earlier, and even though I didn't, get out and do all these competitions, I love to spar. And I learned a lot over the years teaching sparring and sparring lots of different people, different abilities and skills and all of that. So I try to make that relation to where people can see it, because even if somebody doesn't do this style of kung fu or they're not in it for the self-defense, combat sports can be a common ground that somebody can see. Like if they come from a karate background, they know how a roundhouse kick should feel when it hits something. And if they're looking at this book, they're like, oh, that's cool. They have it, a roundhouse kick in their style, that this is how they set it up, or this is what they're looking for. So I wanted to have that. And each kick, I kind of covered those contexts. And I also cover some, there's a couple that you do it in a form and I want to show it, and it has very specific application, like a leg flower from the ground. And there's certain things that aren't going to be able to translate into combat sports, even if you want to stretch it. Like you can do a cool sweep. You can sweep somebody's leg out from underneath them doing a leg flower. And I love it. It's one of my favorites to do. But when I'm sparring somebody in like a combat sports style, I'm not just going to drop down to the ground to try to do this breakdance flare to throw them off. It's not going to work. And even if it does, it's not going to give me the advantage. I'm not going to end up in a better position than they are, other than that they're on their back and I have to scramble to get to the advantageous position. So I'm not going to, blow smoke up, anybody to try to say that this is, you can use it in any context. So there are going to be some mentions in the book about that. I cover supplementary training as well, just kind of, some surface level stuff of like go out and use a resistance band, or you can use, do some balance exercises or do some heavy bag or wooden dummy work. But I'm really, like I said, I'm really happy about this one. And it's kind of inspired me now after doing this project. I'm really thinking about doing one for hand techniques as well and kind of exploring
do it
because
do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny. I never thought about that until after this book has been published, but yeah, that'll be a project down the road. I actually have another book I'm working on at the moment. And, I do want to have a couple of books under my name for Tai Chi as well, and my experience in them. And I think weapons too, because a lot of people know me from YouTube and I do a lot of like weapons tutorials. So I don't always explain, the getting in depth. It's a lot of surface level stuff, like how to just do a single motion. Like most people know me from learning how to spin a staff or learning how to spin swords from me. And I don't really get to talk about, using particular, doing cuts and doing like theory, like what are you, setting up for the next cut or whatever. So I would love to write about that stuff as well. But yeah, that's definitely going to be in the works. I have to do the hand technique one.
That's
awesome.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well,
Fantastic.
I will tell you, I've seen your double knife stuff and I love it.
Awesome.
Being a Wing Chun guy, I love the double knives, but I've had a chance to work with a Southern Mantis dude and a Southern Dragon guy. And we goofed around with the double knives a little bit and I just love them. I'm not, system, I do have my specific systems, but I always like working with other people. And, I just love the knife in general, any way you could use that thing. And watching some of your new videos and, was it Santosh weapons?
Yeah.
Demoed those guys. Yeah. Those are sweet.
Yeah. I cannot wait to, I haven't had a chance to put them into the full contact sparring yet. But I am looking forward to that. I've been using them a lot with just doing some drills and things like that. But he really makes some nice weapons. So his wooden weapons,
high quality stuff.
High quality. Mm-hmm. They're made for contact. So I can't wait to set those things free, and really see how that goes. But so far, I'm really pleased with how they turned out because I'm one of the first people that he worked with these knives and in making these. These are kind of first edition. And he was like, what are your thoughts on the length of this? Because he wanted to make a more open guard to fit a sparring glove, and we had to make some adjustments.
Sure.
But I want to say I had like 10% of input on this project. He did all the rest. He's an amazing guy, but it was really cool to be a part of that and to see these. I want to see these come out, and being able to do some work with Lauscher, Scott Rodell, and his program. It's generated an interest. So hopefully it gets to the point where maybe they even start doing some butterfly knife sparring in their tournaments too. Then maybe they enter that into competition, whether it be same to same or versus Jian or Dao as well. That'd be kind of neat.
Sure.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Western boxing. They have a glove called the bag glove. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
So it basically looks like a mitten, and it's got a thumb, and a lot of them are neoprene. And that's actually what I use for.
Really?
Yeah. Cause
there's like no protection there though.
Oh yeah. But the glove itself, the neoprene, that's good enough for me. Just the neoprene, that's good enough for me. But I like to use those like not for full contact, but like for a rookie, just when we're going through stuff, I'll use those, and they seem to work pretty well, just so we don't, skin. Just so I'm not taking off knuckle skin or anything accidentally or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's like, man, I mean, that's some protection. That'll keep you from getting scuffed, but that's not going to if somebody's going direct to the hand.
No, it's I call it moral support.
Yeah.
You need that moral support, right? Well, Sifu, this has been amazing and, far more than I was expecting. And I'm super excited about that. And I luckily found you. We'll do a shout out to our all mutual friend, Sifu Alex Richter, the Kung Fu genius. Yeah. Shout out to that guy. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have found you. And I'm so glad I did. And thank you for your time today. This has been great.
Thank you very much.
This is really cool for me. I'm really looking forward to hearing myself on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
Being up with that, I feel like I'm in the who's who now.
Awesome.
You got it. Well, thank you for your time. And have a blessed day, and we'll keep in contact, my friend.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.